Chosen ones. There are records in the vaults of power that no citizen was ever meant to know existed. Not maps, not treaties, not the codes that guard the skies, but something older, stranger, more unnerving. Among these locked archives lies a file, an emergency record. It is not a file of events, not a list of actions or disasters. It holds only a single thing: your name. Imagine the panic in the control room when the system flagged a blank sheet as top priority. No details, no explanations. Just one word: you. No dates of birth, no addresses, no identifiers, yet everyone in the room understood instantly that it was not a mistake. It had triggered alarms usually reserved for nuclear strikes or breaches in cosmic surveillance. The protocol labeled it Emergency Record Alpha, and even the highest generals refused to speak of it. The archivist who first saw it said her skin burned as if the paper itself was alive. She swore the letters of your name shimmered in a faint light, as though written in something beyond ink. When she blinked, the glow faded, but the impression lingered in her vision, etched into her memory, like fire behind her eyelids. What unsettled them most was the absence of context. A file is supposed to contain history, reference points, data to analyze. But this one resisted analysis. The moment any agent attempted to scan, copy, or even summarize it, the system collapsed. Servers went dark. Monitors bled static. Only when the attempt stopped did the network return, as if the record itself rejected replication. The president was informed within minutes. Advisors rushed to frame it as a glitch, but the AI security system overrode their dismissals. It declared the file irreplaceable and non-deletable. That phrase, non-deletable, sent chills through those present. It meant the record was not born of man-made code. It had originated from somewhere else, outside their control, outside their laws of input and command. The emergency record sits in a drawer no hand dares open again. Guards walk past it without meeting its gaze, as if a paper could watch them. Still, it waits, silent, breathing. And the question echoing through shadowed halls is not, why was it written, but who ordered it to exist in the first place? The night was quiet until the sirens wailed. Not the kind that warn of storms or the hum of military drills, but a deep, resonant alarm that seemed to vibrate through the bones of the earth. It began in the control hub, buried beneath layers of reinforced steel, a place where silence was supposed to reign unless the unthinkable occurred. No missile had launched, no hostile radar crossed the sky, yet the alarm insisted on danger. Screens that had never flickered before began to pulse with a red light. Operators froze, their training unraveling as the noise continued to rise. Fingers hovered above keys, waiting for instructions that never came. Each second stretched, heavy and suffocating. The system labeled the event as Trigger Zero, a protocol that had been spoken of in whispers but never witnessed. An officer attempted to override the alarm, pressing in commands meant to silence emergencies. Instead, the console rejected him. The words "Access Denied" glowed across the screen. But what unsettled him most was what came after. His reflection disappeared from the monitor's glass, replaced by a single name. Your name. Letters so precise, so clean, as though carved by something not entirely human. The sound intensified. Lights along the corridor dimmed, not from power loss, but as if energy itself was being pulled toward that word. Security rushed in, their boots clattering like thunder against metal floors. but none could explain why the alarm rang without cause. They checked air defenses. They checked nuclear silos. They checked seismic activity. All reported silence. Only the alarm declared chaos, and only your name gave it definition. The commander on duty whispered to his second-in-command that this felt like a test, though he could not explain by whom. Every manual, every classified guideline ended at trigger 0. Beyond it was blank, as though the authors of the system knew some truths could never be written. Hours later, the alarm stopped on its own, not silenced, not shut down. It simply ended, leaving the air heavy with questions. But in that silence, the officers swore they still felt the vibration under their skin, as if the alarm had never fully ceased. Something had been awakened, and the record of that night remained sealed with one chilling note: unresolved, awaiting reoccurrence. The file was opened again under dim light, not by order, but by curiosity that refused to die. Agents leaned over the desk, eyes fixed on the plain sheet, yet they noticed something new, something that had not been there before. Along the edges, faint markings shimmered, like words pressed into the fibers by an invisible hand. It was not ink nor pencil, but indentations glowing faintly as though heat had branded them into existence. The archivist closest to it whispered that the shapes resembled ancient script, not of any language she had studied in her lifetime. When ultraviolet was passed over the page, the markings blazed brighter. Letters formed into a phrase that none of the officers could deny was scripture. They read aloud, hesitant, their voices trembling. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The room fell silent, for they knew the words were ancient, tied to Yeshua, the Nazarene whose very presence once unsettled empires. But why would a classified emergency record carry a psalm? Why would your name sit above it like a title? The implications stretched further than their clearance allowed. Religion was forbidden in these halls of control. Faith had no place on documents of state. Yet the psalm was there, unerasable, immune to scanners, ink removers, and every attempt to conceal it. One officer swore that as he stared at the margins, the letters seemed to move, arranging themselves into different verses depending on who gazed at them. Some saw prophecy, some saw warning. One claimed he saw only his own name fading beneath yours, as though the page recognized him and chose to blot him out. Reports of this discovery were not typed into the system. The AI rejected every attempt, crashing the server before any line was saved. The only record that survived was the memory of those who witnessed it, and memory is far more dangerous than data. In the following nights, some agents dreamt of the psalm, their sleep interrupted by a voice reciting it again and again, echoing through their skulls. The morning left them pale, convinced that the margins of the page were not finished writing. They feared what new words would appear when it was opened again under another light. When the order came to authenticate the record, it bypassed every chain of approval. Normally, signatures were gathered like armor, layer upon layer of authorization to protect the state from miscalculation. But this document did not travel upward through the labyrinth of ranks. Instead, it appeared on the desk of a single official, as though the system itself had chosen him. He was an old man in uniform, decorated with medals that weighed heavily on his chest. His hair was silver, his eyes tired from decades of watching governments rise and fall. Yet when he looked at the paper, his breath stopped. The name at the center of the file pulsed faintly, not glowing, but moving. like a heartbeat under parchment. He pressed his palm against it as if to steady himself, but when he pulled away, a faint outline of his hand lingered there. A shadow burned into the page. No one in the room spoke. They waited, frozen, while he reached for his pen. The silence was thick, filled with unspoken dread. When the nib touched the margin, the pen bled ink before he even wrote. His signature curved across the bottom as if guided by another force. He never lifted his eyes. When the last letter of his name was complete, the pen broke in half, the metal splitting clean down the middle. The file accepted the mark. The margins shifted, sealing the signature into the fibers. The glow ceased. The heartbeat stopped. But the man who had signed it sat motionless. His eyes were open, unblinking, his chest rising only once more before falling into stillness. Doctors rushed in, yet no explanation sufficed. He was not gone from a wound, nor from sickness. His life had been claimed by silence itself, as if the act of acknowledging the file had demanded payment. The others in the room dared not touch the document again. They left it on the table where his final breath had landed. Hours later, security entered to move the body. But when they glanced back at the file, they saw something impossible. The signature was gone. The page was clean once more, unmarked, untouched, waiting for another hand to try. The record was carried to the strategy chamber, though no one dared to touch it with bare hands. Gloves, steel cases, reinforced locks, none of it lessened the unease. Generals who had faced nuclear standoffs and midnight crises found themselves staring at a single page as though it were an enemy more powerful than any nation. They laid it on the table under the cold light of projection lamps. The room was sealed. No sound permitted to leak, yet still the walls seemed to hum with tension. One general demanded a full analysis, another demanded its destruction. But before debate could begin, the words changed again. Across the top margin, fresh lines formed in a language every man recognized. It was scripture once more, familiar and dangerous. "My kingdom is not of this world." The phrase struck like thunder. It was Yeshua's voice echoing through centuries, breaking into their command. Some officers turned their faces away, as though refusing to acknowledge it might shield them. Others leaned closer, compelled against their will. The file had ignored hierarchy. It had bypassed the chain of command they worshipped. Instead, it dictated its own authority, placing ancient truth above modern rank. One general slammed his fist down, declaring the message a forgery. He ordered the lights cut, but even in darkness the words burned faintly, like embers refusing to die. He shouted for the file to be destroyed, but no hand reached for it. Those present felt the weight of something more than ink. It was not merely a verse, it was command itself bending around an unseen power. Whispers spread quickly. If the record could insert scripture into the highest chambers of control, what else could it do? Could it alter laws? Could it erase orders before they reached the battlefield? Could it silence voices of power before they spoke? The generals left the chamber divided, their unity fractured. Some wanted to bury the file deeper than before, hidden where no light could touch it. Others wanted to confront it, to demand answers, though none could say from whom. When the doors shut and the chamber emptied, the page remained alone on the table. Hours passed. Then, in the darkness, letters shifted once again, as if preparing to write a new command no one had asked for. The order was given for the document to be briefed to the next tier of command. Normally, an officer in his position would have carried it into the chamber without hesitation, reciting every line with precision. But this man, seasoned by war and scarred by decisions that had buried nations, felt something coil in his chest the moment he was told what he would carry. He stood in the corridor outside the glass briefing hall, staring at the sealed case in his hands. His breathing grew shallow, as though the weight of the file compressed his lungs. The red stamp marked Emergency Record Alpha glared back at him. But what unsettled him most was the faint vibration in the case, as if the page inside was alive. The council inside waited. Generals shuffled their papers. Intelligence chiefs whispered to one another. Yet the officer remained frozen, sweat rolling down his temple. He muttered under his breath that no human hand should be forced to deliver a message that seemed written by something beyond men. When the aide urged him forward, he shook his head. He said the document had already taken one life, the man who signed in silence, and he would not be the next. He set the case on the ground and stepped back, refusing the chain of duty for the first time in his career. The aide warned him of treason, of courts-martial, of disgrace that would erase decades of service. Still, he did not move. Instead, he whispered that the file belonged not in the hands of leaders, but in the hands of the one whose name it carried. His voice cracked as he said it, as though speaking the thought aloud had cut him from within. The council inside grew restless, unaware of the drama beyond the glass. The aide finally lifted the case and carried it forward, but the officer turned and walked away down the corridor. Cameras followed him, recording every step of refusal. His badge access was revoked within minutes, his rank stripped before he even left the building. Yet the expression on his face was not of shame, but of grim relief. He had escaped the burden others still carried. When the case was finally unlocked again, the page inside had changed. The council expected the same script, the same unyielding name in the center, but what greeted them was stranger still. Large portions of the page were now blacked out. Entire sections had been redacted, though none of them had applied the ink. It looked as though the file had censored itself, hiding meaning from those not ready to bear it. The analysts leaned in with magnifiers, searching for what lay beneath the blackout. What they discovered sent chills through the chamber. Between the heavy lines of redaction, faint outlines of symbols emerged. The patterns were too precise to be mistakes. They formed a cross, perfectly aligned, stretching from margin to margin. The image appeared only under certain light. When the lamp was dimmed, the cross vanished, leaving nothing but void. But when the light was restored, the shape shone again, not with brightness, but with a depth that seemed to draw their eyes inward. The council members murmured uneasily, recalling stories they had heard in youth, of Yeshua carrying a cross through streets lined with mockery, a burden no one else could carry. The parallel was not missed. This record, too, bore a weight none of them dared to touch. One man reached for the paper, trying to peel back the blackout with a blade. The moment the metal touched the surface, the lights in the chamber flickered. His hand seized, paralyzed as if gripped by invisible force. He gasped, dropping the blade, and swore that he felt wood beneath his fingertips, not paper. He stumbled back, his eyes wide, whispering of splinters and nails. The others pressed him for explanation, but he only shook his head. He said the file was no longer words on a page, but a doorway, one that responded to light, one that revealed only what it wished. And he feared the next unveiling would not be a symbol, but something far more direct. The council sealed the document once more, but not before a final detail emerged. The chamber was chosen carefully, a windowless room buried deeper than any bunker, designed for silence. It was a place where world-shaking decisions were once made, where even whispers felt like intrusions. The file was placed on the center table under dim light, surrounded by men and women who had sworn oaths to protect secrets larger than nations. Yet when the case was opened, no one dared speak. Their training urged them to analyze, to question, to dissect every anomaly. But the atmosphere grew heavy, pressing against their throats, turning words into stone. The room itself seemed to forbid sound. One by one, they glanced at each other, waiting for someone to break the silence. No one did. Their eyes returned to the page, and the longer they stared, the less certain they became that language was even necessary. The letters of your name seemed to breathe, pulsing like a slow drumbeat. Each throb resonated in their chests, syncing their heartbeats with the rhythm of the page. A secretary tried to record the session, raising her device above the table. The moment she pressed the button, the screen fractured into static. The noise of the device should have filled the room, but it was swallowed whole, devoured before it could echo. Even machinery could not speak here. Some believed the silence was not absence, but presence, an unseen listener filling every gap between breaths. Others thought it was a test. Would they speak lies? Would they try to control what was not theirs? Or would they surrender to the stillness? The weight of that decision paralyzed them all. One general finally opened his mouth, but no sound came. His lips formed words, yet his voice was stolen before it reached the air. He pressed a hand to his throat, his eyes wide with terror. Then, slowly, the letters on the page shifted, almost mocking him, as if the file itself had claimed his speech. The meeting ended without conclusion. They filed out one by one, silent as shadows, leaving the document untouched. But later, when guards returned to clear the room, they found something disturbing. They had sealed the record in a vault, marked with layers of protection. Biometric locks, rotating codes, reinforced steel, and a ceremonial wax seal pressed by the highest authority. It was meant to sleep, untouched, until some future crisis demanded its return. Yet midnight came, and the vault refused to remain closed. The guards on watch swore. The air grew heavy at the stroke of 12. The lights flickered, not with power loss, but with a dim golden glow that had no source. Then came the sound, a crack like thunder, but no storm raged outside. When they turned, the seal itself split. Wax shattered into dust, scattered across the cold floor like ashes. Inside, the document lay unchanged at first glance, but when the vault door swung wider, the page caught the midnight light that spilled through the narrow slit of reinforced glass. That was when the lines shifted again. Along the margin, letters wrote themselves slowly, glowing as though carved by fire. The words were not random. They were deliberate, weighted, impossible to ignore. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The soldiers who read it felt their knees weaken. They recognized the words as Yeshua's cry from the cross, a plea of mercy offered in the very moment of betrayal. Yet here, centuries later, they appeared on a page that bore your name. The meaning was blurred, terrifying. Forgive who? For what? And why now, when silence had already demanded so much? One officer backed away, muttering that the vault was no longer holding a file but hosting a presence. He claimed the midnight glow was not mere light, but gaze, the unseen watching them, recording their fear as carefully as their signatures. The council was summoned, but by the time they arrived, the words had dimmed. Only faint impressions remained, still warm to the touch. The seal could not be replaced. No hand dared try. The vault door hung open, exposed, as though the file had declared itself beyond their authority. And so they left it, guarded yet unguarded, untouched yet never alone. For even as they turned their backs, the midnight light lingered faintly, illuminating just enough to reveal that the margins of the page had begun preparing to write again. The record had been watched for days without change, until the night when the surveillance feeds began to fail. One by one, cameras in the vault went dark, monitors blinking into static, leaving only fragments of light. At first, technicians assumed it was a system fault, a routine failure, but the blackout spread too quickly, cascading through wires like a living thing. The last working feed focused on the page. For a moment it appeared ordinary, resting in its case. Then, the edges began to ripple, as if the fibers were waves stirred by unseen wind. Analysts leaned closer, their eyes wide as the paper itself began to split, folding open like a door. Yet there was no second sheet beneath it, only depth, an impossible abyss stretching into nothing. The operators swore they heard faint whispers bleeding from the feed. Not mechanical noise, not interference, but voices speaking from within the page. Some said the voices chanted, others said they wept, still others insisted it was their own names being called back to them. Whatever the truth, the sound carried weight, making even the strongest tremble. Then came the blackout. Every feed, every console, every backup line went dark at once. The building fell silent, humming only with the fear of those inside. Emergency power should have restored order, but instead the generators stalled, as though drained by something hungrier than circuits. In that darkness, those present described a glow faint as a dying ember. It pulsed from within the vault, slow, steady, defiant. Guards who braved the dark corridor claimed they saw symbols crawling across the page, marks like veins, branching outward as though the document were alive, drawing power from the blackout itself. When the lights finally returned, the abyss had closed. The page lay flat again, silent, unmarked, refusing to admit what had occurred. But a single addition lingered near the bottom corner, the faint outline of a number, incomplete, half-formed, as though it marked the beginning of something unfinished. No one knew whether it was counting forward or backward. Yet the implication was clear. The blackout was not an accident. It was preparation, and the unfinished number waited, ready to finish itself at a moment no one could predict. When the file was opened for the last time, the air itself seemed to recoil. Those gathered swore the room grew colder, though no vent stirred. The page lay still in its case, yet everyone knew it was not finished. Too much had shifted. Too much had been revealed in fragments. They expected a final sentence, some conclusion that would tie the impossible together. But the paper resisted. At the center, your name remained, steady, untarnished, refusing to fade. Around it, the margins were no longer empty. They carried the weight of symbols, faint echoes of verses, fragments of psalms, shapes of a cross that had appeared and disappeared like a ghost. It was as though the page had gathered all its layers of revelation for this final unveiling. Then the letters began to move. Slowly, deliberately, they arranged into words. Those present held their breath, expecting the final command. Yet halfway through, the writing stopped. The pen of the unseen froze. The words hovered, incomplete, as though waiting for permission. The phrase that began to form was unmistakable. "It is Finn." The last letters never appeared. The reference was undeniable. Yeshua's cry from the cross, the moment history itself trembled. But here, the page had denied completion, withholding the final word that once sealed redemption. The file had paused at the brink, leaving its prophecy half-born. Some claimed it was deliberate, a message that the ending was not theirs to write. Others whispered that the page was waiting for you, the one whose name it carried, to finish what had been left undone. The silence after that incomplete phrase was unbearable. Not absence, but pressure. As though the air itself strained for closure. The officers present debated furiously. Some demanded it be locked away forever. Others argued that leaving it unfinished would doom them, that prophecy denied would return heavier than before. But none dared touch the paper again. Every hand shook before it neared. Every voice broke before it reached command. When the lights flickered once more, the phrase faded, leaving only your name behind. Clean, untouched, sovereign. And the space where the last word should have been lingered, open, expectant, as though the page still waited for the one hand bold enough to write the word it refused to complete.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.